excited to be talking to a designer whose journey I have followed for over 20 years now, Ashish Soni, as part of the My Identity, My Blender's Pride Fashion Tour Masterclass. Ashish Soni is one of India's most path-breaking designers. He started his career as an intern for Rohit Bal and became the first Indian designer to show at New York Fashion Week. He is also responsible for Shah Rukh Khan's first commercial ad. He'll be telling us more in this conversation. So you really are one of the shapers of Indian fashion, Ashish Soni. When you became a designer, it was a very different time. It seems like you were almost one family. I know you interned with Rohit Bal. Suneet used to help you with your sketches, that Suneet Verma, and then JJ Valaya was a close buddy. Tell us about those days and what do you miss the most?
Hi, Sujata. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, those were very, very different times. I think there was a very close camaraderie that we all shared. And to some extent, we've sort of lost that over the years simply because, no one sees each other as often as we did back then. But having said that, there were about 10 to 12 of us, I think, where we collectively sort of shaped the industry. And that was what was very exciting because, we actually didn't know what was coming next. So the 90s were, if you were to talk about whether from the time that I was actually interning with Rohit to even a few years thereon, I actually consider the whole of the 90s as like an internship period. I tend to think that, and that I speak for pretty much most of us, where we were all trying to find our feet. We were trying to find our goals, everybody had a vision, but there was nothing else that could support that vision but yourself, right? And so you actually created the market yourself. You were, you'd go out there and think about so many different aspects of running a commercial business, and ensuring that you had, money to pay salaries on every seventh. And so things which have changed over the years, because things became much more systematic and much easier.
How important is it to have that internship? I mean, how important is it to work somewhere else before you become a fashion designer?
So this question is something that, we've always talked about. And I think that both in terms of a formal education and then definitely a serious industry internship I consider them musts.
Okay.
Simply because, what an education does is sort of gives you, teaches you what you'd otherwise, learn by doing mistakes when you sort of do not take that education. And an internship, I think, polishes you and sort of, curates you in a way that, okay, this is what the real thing is. It's one thing making a pattern in a lab at NIFT, but thereafter, when you've actually got to, work with a master, speak his language, understand his nuances, go out there and learn how to sort of interact with people that you'll have to work with, both in terms of the consumer facet, as well as all your tailors, your master embroiderers, those things, and of course the sort of vision that you get from a leader like Rohit, where whenever you sort of intern with someone, there's a large chunk of their sensibility that they sort of share, right? And you understand those finer nuances, which eventually really helps you build an identity for yourself, so that it's not about aping somebody else, but to learning from him was something where you sort of see, okay, these are the absolute must-haves if you want to succeed in this business.
You must have so many people applying to you for an internship. How do you choose the people who work with Ashish Soni?
So, over the years, there have been many, and, funnily enough, in fact, I was discussing it the other day, some of my best ex-interns or whatever, most of them are actually abroad now, working with so many different designers abroad. But I think what I look for, the most possibly is this, is the intuitive ability that the young child should have. Because I think, a lot of us kind of follow trends or think, okay, when you bring the portfolio, okay, they're trying to impress you. But I don't think those are the things that matter. It's about what I tend to see is, is this person hungry? Is there enough sort of, is there a fire in the belly? And is there, is there an inherent talent that can be nurtured? So those are the key things I personally look for when I'm, interviewing a bunch of interns.
So as I mentioned, you started in the 90s, which is when I started my career too. And I remember you made a pair of black pants for me. And there was no one doing Western wear at that time. And of course, everyone was doing a term I hate to use, which they called ethnic wear. What made you decide that you wanted to do Western wear and tailored? Because tailoring is, we're known for our drape. We're not really known for our tailoring. So what made you decide concentrate on that?
Well, there were a couple of factors for that. First one was that I did not grow up in India. I grew up in Africa, so I had a sort of and I grew up around a lot of different people from very different races. And therefore, I had a very multicultural sort of approach in terms of my upbringing, right? And in the kind of people I was exposed to. So when I moved to India, which was in the late 80s, which was just for finishing school, because my parents had moved to Dubai, and there were no schools in Dubai, so I ended up being in Delhi. And what I found was that once I got into the fashion scene, ethnic or Indian wear didn't come to me naturally. So okay. Yes, it was a very big challenge, and to sort of try and swim upstream because everybody else was doing this. And
so you need to design what comes to you authentically, correct?
Absolutely, so I could have. I'll be honest. There were a few dabbles that I did, but it was disastrous, right? It was not something it was coming from the heart. It was just something I was trying to do to stay afloat. But then I realized somewhere down the line that unless you're honest about what you're doing, it's not going to work. And so eventually, yes, it was very difficult. But I figured that if you're true to your craft, that is what will actually help you build that identity. So, for example, when you talk about those pants, I have various such people like yourselves who remembered such stories from even 20 years ago. And to be honest, those kind of things are extremely good to hear even 20 years down the line. That because I was crazy about making selling a white shirt, and selling as many as possible. But people thought I was crazy back then. That you'll never survive it. So yes, things were very tough in the early 90s, but what I think the whole business changed towards the end of the 90s when we came together and formed the FDCI, because there was a certain sort of semblance that came into the madness, right?
Yeah.
And with the formation of the FDCI, I think my career definitely started changing, and things started moving for the whole industry.
So you showed, I know we're always one of the solo shows at whether it was Lakme India Fashion Week or Lakme Fashion Week or the FDCI Fashion Week. And then you became the first designer to show at New York Fashion Week from India. What is your advice to anyone who's looking to make it internationally today?
So, some things were quite different from then. It's been almost, 13, 14 years. But certain things certain rules are still in play, and some of the things that a lot of people don't know is even through my launch in New York was in 2005, but before that, almost from early 2000s,
you scored 60 points in US, correct? At one point, 60 points of sale.
Yeah, almost 72 before the crash in 2008.
Wow.
So 2008 was my fourth season, and it would have been a very different story had the markets not crashed the way they did. But that was in no one's control, so that we can let that be. But the other thing was that everyone today thinks of straight away looking at a catwalk show or a mainstream presentation. What I'd like to tell you here is that I spent 4 years in Europe, doing the trade fairs at London Fashion Week, season after season. And so there were a couple of things that I'd like to share, which is what everyone needs to know, that what they're looking for is consistency, right? The second thing is no one's interested in sparks of genius that only last one season. So my biggest advice is, even if sometimes you have a brilliant idea, space it out. Work on it in a manner that you have a story to tell over the next 3 or 4 seasons. Because otherwise, you could be this fantastic breakthrough young designer, and everyone loves you season one, but you can't hold that over the next couple of seasons. So that has always been something that because I was out there, I was learning it without actually being in the middle of the pitch. And so I think those were some key things that Anna Orsini actually taught me, when I was doing when I used to do London Fashion Week. And eventually, so for example, it was quite frustrating for the first couple of seasons when you never had any of the big stores buying you, right? You had a lot of the smaller stores, but eventually, when I was, when the third season, when I was back in Selfridges, after the big exhibition that the India thing that Mr. Sethi had curated, there was a break of almost a year and a half, and then I was back in Selfridges, and the sell-throughs were just so amazing. When I asked the buyer, but you've been seeing me for the last 3 seasons. What have you been waiting for almost, right? He said, that's exactly what I was waiting for. We want to see, are you in a position to come back? Are you in this for good? Are you serious about doing this? So, that's what I said. This needs to be there's a planned way that one needs to go about this. And of course, the other big thing that I'd like to add here is that, which I didn't do, and I think especially in today's day and age, if somebody wants to do that, is, of course, we were spending a lot of time in those cities, both London or New York or Paris. However, in today's day and age, I would really advise that person to be actually living out of that city.
Okay. Because
that makes a very, very big difference, especially in this world where today travel is so much more difficult than it was 2 years ago. So, of course, yes, we've been on Zoom and various other sort of platforms, but in our businesses, if you were to actually live and spend a large amount of time in those cities, breaking through those markets would be far easier.
So if you want to go, but do you need to make your base in India first and then go international, do you feel? Do you think
Absolutely.
People are too much in a hurry to go international, especially when you're young?
That's a very good point. I totally, vouch and agree with that statement, because you need to have that craft base set in India. You need to have something that you're taking to them that's Indian, but it's it speaks a global language. It's a tone of voice that everyone understands, and it could have Indian nuances. It could have an Indian voice. And for example, I never hid my ethnicity anywhere I went. In fact, I overplayed it, and it worked for me. And so I would suggest the same thing. But it's the language and the tone of voice that matters. And people need to understand that you're taking some very interesting parts of India and presenting it. For what I did was to sort of present a modern version of India.
I know, like a white shirt of yours would have that, like a bangala collar, and it would have those pin tucks. It would work so well with a Ralph Lauren suit, but that shirt just added this sort of element of being Indian yet international. And I think that's what people are looking for when they're looking for something India. They want something that speaks of being Indian, correct?
So absolutely. So my advice again to the young designers out there are 2 things. When you're an Indian designer, textile is extremely important. Then is craft, and then of course craftsmanship. If you can create a combination of those 3 things, and then you have your language and your identity built into that, which is not a borrowed identity. Sky's the limit.
So the New York Fashion Show, which I think is sort of the highlight of your career, which is why I keep coming back to it, but I don't think many people know, and I was really excited to find out, was that supermodel Rosie Huntington-Whiteley made her debut at her show, at your fashion show. After that, of course, you've been known for quite a few celebrities, whether it's Shah Rukh or Saif Ali Khan. How important is celebrity dressing today? Because I feel as though a lot of young designers place a lot of emphasis on celebrity dressing. Where do you think it should go in the balance?
Good question. But what happens is that I think a lot of the celebrities that we dress, from the time that we were sort of working in Bollywood, which was, when I used to do a lot of styling work, because back in the early 90s, there were no stylists, right? There were a handful of people who were working on campaigns, and the advertising medium itself sort of exploded towards the middle of the 90s with the advent of Star TV and all these channels that came into India. So everybody wanted to put an ad on TV, and suddenly we needed celebrities too. So almost the end of the supermodel era was then, and they started getting replaced by film stars or cricketers. That's when it sort of started towards the end of the 90s. Yes, so what it does to, and therefore thereafter it's just become a roller coaster, right? So from the fact that all your top magazines will have a Bollywood celebrity on the cover because that's what sells the magazine. Similarly, yes, so dressing celebrities definitely helps our sales go up. That particular outfit or that actual, for example, I've had this chat with Manish about one sari that when Steph and Karina were getting married, one of the saris that he made for Karina, he ended up selling 14,000 of them.
Wow.
So it's one of those things, right? That's what celebrities are for. But I think the balance is extremely important because you can't lose focus of that, they can't become your medium towards sale, right? At the end of it, I think the product is more important, right? So you have to have a product that's desirable by everyone else. For instance, if my identity doesn't sort of work on a particular celebrity, then I'll never buy that product because it's always sort of revolving around him or her.
And social media, I think, has really changed the game when it comes to, of course, celebrity dressing. How have you seen social media change the game? And is it a great advantage that young designers have today, or are there some things that social media actually mean that they sometimes you make mistakes because of social media?
So yeah, this is this is something obviously when during the early 90s or 2000s, none of us had sort of access to social media. I sometimes wonder if it would have been different for us.
How quick were you to get onto social media? When did you join Instagram?
So for a while, actually, I didn't because initially I just thought it was just like it was another way of. So my biggest apprehension back then has actually come true, which was which I still feel, and I'm wondering if you guys agree with me, which is that it has caused, apart from all the benefits, it sort of reduces the shelf life of things that could be beautiful and forever. Okay. So for instance, you could have for example, classic products, which are handmade, handcrafted, which are, things you want to put into heirlooms. But what happens with social media is that you put it on, its validity is that 1 week or those 4 days because it's got to be replaced. Otherwise, nobody's watching it. There are no eyeballs, right? So that's a big negative for me, right? That you're losing heritage. So it's almost like, and therefore it's also fueling is excessive consumption. You're producing that much more because you have to feed that much more onto the social media network, right? So it's almost like it didn't start off that way, but that's the challenge we're all now having, right? From, do we even have that much content? Are we even producing?
You're keeping up with, we're on this treadmill that seems to be never ending.
That's right. And so that's a big negative for me, right? Of course, the positives are that it's become a very easy medium to sell product, right? So and it crosses barriers and geographical barriers, which are otherwise very difficult, because you'd actually physically have to have a website or, have a website, have physical product in those cities. A lot of that has changed. Social media has changed that. So yes, it makes our reach, we can penetrate far more demographic markets. Therefore, it's easier to reach out to a new consumer, which otherwise, you'd never find that consumer. So whilst those positives are there, I'm sure some sort of semblance, some sort of balance we need to create, and which could be individual to all brands. But I think especially the young generation needs to use this tool interestingly and wisely rather than just following the herd.
Correct. Okay. So in India, probably the first platform to take fashion to the the second markets, not Bombay and Delhi, was probably the Blenders Pride fashion tour. The way it kind of toured, and it gave a lot of young designers a great platform. And you've been associated with for many years. Just, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you think this platform can bring to a business and how you can use this platform well?
So, apart from so Blenders Pride Fashion Tour has a very, very big significance, I think, in all the designers that have been associated with it in the recent past, or even through the late 2000s. And when I say that, what I mean is that when I'm sort of doing a show at any of the fashion weeks, I'm governed to some extent by commerce, right? I need
Okay.
to, I have, there are some books and rules I need to follow. There are, I'm also doing those shows specifically because I need to sell those products. There are buyers from across the world, a lot of whom we've, had at over many years at FDCI. However, what the difference at a Blenders Pride Fashion Tour event is that I am creatively free to do whatever I feel like, right? So that is a very, very big advantage because it makes me speak my language the way I want to without any commercial language, any commercial intervention governing it. So what that does is for when it's anyone out there, it sort of helps us, put our, not, I wouldn't say best, but most favorite foot out there, So for instance,
It's almost like your
it's
own
not, I'm
magazine
not saying
editorial.
one does outrageous
It's like
collections, but
it's like your own magazine editorial, right? It's like this is your platform to show your best.
that's right. It just becomes far more interesting.
So, there's all this talk of digital
Yeah.
showing and of social media, which we just discussed. You were amongst the first fashion designers to do a solo fashion show in India. How important do you think the fashion show will remain even in a post-pandemic world? Do you think the fashion show is always going to be relevant?
That the madness, that adrenaline drives us. It's what keeps us and makes us who we are as brands, right? And so I think, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues are missing it too. And it's something that I think, so the fashion show is very difficult. People have talked about this over the years, that it's going to die. It doesn't have there's no longevity in this. So I don't think the show is ever going to die.
There's something about the show, right? It's the feeling, it's the audience, it's the theater. You know what I mean? It is theater to fashion. I think that feeling is something that digital can never replace.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's that, it's the emotion, as far as I'm concerned, that at the end of it, that you feel, it's almost like 4 months of work, and in 20 minutes you sort of put it out there, and of course, reactions affect you, and over the years you learn to take both failure and success in your stride. But just that craziness and that atmosphere, the lights, the sound, the 600 people, I hope we return to it very soon.
So to be chosen for a nationwide talent like this, but it's powered by the Fashion Design Council of India, which you mentioned earlier, and I know you were a big part of forming that, is really a big deal. And as you mentioned, you have to be more than a one show, one season wonder. How does a fashion designer keep that momentum going? And when they're planning this show, how do they plan this show as part of their bigger picture?
Well, again, I think this question is quite related to, again, back to what we're discussing today, which is my identity, my pride, right? So here, my advice to all the young designers is, building an identity doesn't happen overnight, right? It will take a serious amount of time, effort, as well as and the approach, right? So you've got to figure out, okay, what is it that I really like? How does my story look? So of course, in today's day and age, we've often been asked that, was it easier back then because there was no one to say what was happening, or is it easier now? I think in one way it's easier now because you've got an audience that recognizes talent. You've got consumers, you've got people like yourself who actually see when if there's a new star on the horizon, there's someone who can notice it. None of that was happening in the 90s. So having said that, both things in terms of the finish of your garment, the way it looks inside out, the way you styled it, is it trend relevant? All of that matters. But are you being able to consistently build a language? It's almost like a child, right? You don't start. You're not born. When you're born, you don't start speaking immediately. So it's almost that same approach has to be in your identity, where so a connect from season 1 to season 2 to season 3, which includes evolution. So it's not that when I see you on your season 3, it looks exactly like what was in season 1. I need to see some evolution in that product, and I need to see the fact that there is some language, which it could be small details. It could be the way you do your buttonholes. It could be the way you've hand finished the garment. Those things which you start owning then, and they carry forward, into your story, into your collection over the years. So, and if you've, over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of people have been successful in doing that. So, that's my key message to the young designer out there.
So if we take your brand, Ashish Soni, and the hashtag My Identity, My Pride, what are 5 elements you think that say My Identity, My Pride in the Ashish Soni world?
So, even from before, even through the sort of early 90s when I started, where there was very little, where myself was very, very little, I had very little exposure, right? So that's, again, something that we were also discussing the other day, that exposure is extremely important, right? So even with, and it was much more difficult back then because, there was no internet. We didn't have access to magazines. There were no journalists like yourself who were writing interesting pieces for people to read. So all what we were doing, I was sort of waiting for that, for the Vogue magazine to come to Khan Market so I could go buy the 2-month-old edition. Right, that was the level of exposure until you got onto a flight and you got to London, right, or Paris or wherever. Things are very different today. If you're on the ball, you could be, what's going on in fashion. You could be, whether it's on social media, on the internet, people, a young kid who's interested in fashion today, he or she can definitely keep him or herself updated with what's going on. So that's one of the very, very important things. Having said that, for me personally, to answer your question specifically, even back then, I always believed that the 3 F's were very important to me, which were fabric, fit, and fall. So, for instance, as soon as you combine those 3 things, so I built my identity actually on those 3 things, right? I remember even some crazy conversations where I perhaps we've discussed this with friends, where I've always been obsessed about good fabric. I actually believe that 50% of the battle is won when you're working with great textile. After that, it's the way you cut it, and then of course the way the customer feels when he or she wears that product. So for me, those were the pillars around which I built my identity, and that's what I'm known for even today within the brand.
For a young designer to have a pandemic happen, like suppose in the first 5 years of your label, it's really much more difficult and quite difficult for designers to overcome this. What would you say to them about being in this moment?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think the situation is hit whether an established brand or a young up and coming designer, equally, and hence there's no better timing for the showcase, which is the Blenders by Talent Hunt platform powered by FDCI. Simply because if you've got it, this is where you need to be, because you're going to have the kind of things that the kind of opportunity that lies if you were to win. Money can't buy experiences. There are things that would change your entire career. So, which is why we thought that this is the sort of right time to sort of reach out to the industry, both in terms of the young designers and the other categories, and ensure that talent gets nurtured. Because of course, people have been hit badly, and I'm sure a lot of the youngsters are feeling demoralized. This is one way of actually saying, "Come on, guys, we've all overcome this, and let's sort of get out there and put our best foot forward."
When years ago there were no prizes like this, something like a Blenders Pride Fashion Tour powering with FDCI. You've got 2 of the most important legacy platforms in India working together. So I think for young designers, this is just a wonderful moment for them to take advantage, and also to learn from all of you senior designers who've been part of it for so long. I just wanted to end, since the hashtag is My Identity, My Pride, by asking you, what is your proudest moment in your career?
Well, it sort of goes back to New York again, because of course there were a lot of things otherwise, but I think the proudest, my identity, my proud moment would have been when Susie Menkes actually came backstage, and everyone knew who she was, and the fact that she came backstage, suddenly there were like hundreds of photographers, and they were like, she just walked up to me and she noticed she'd noticed the element of Gujarat that I played on. And so I think I was actually speechless. I can't even remember that conversation, to be honest. I think it was a one-way conversation where she was just talking and I don't know what I was saying. I can't remember any of it. I've asked her later over the years that, I don't remember that conversation at all. Introduced me to Susie. And so, yeah, I think, that moment would be my proudest moment.
So Fern Malice at that time headed New York Fashion Week, correct?
Yes. So Fern was, a big game changer in my career because at that point in time, I was spending a lot of time in London. And because I was doing the London Fashion Week in terms of the stalls, I had an agent in the UK who was selling everything for me. And Anna Orsini had actually pushed me to say that you need to do a catwalk show. And
do you want to just explain who Anna is just to the viewers so that they know?
So Anna Orsini at that time headed the London Fashion Week platform, and she was also in India. And that was the first time I met Fern. And then right after a show that which is actually organized by the FDCI, Fern said to me that, listen, I need you to come to New York City and I want you to be there next season. And I'm going to do whatever you want, whatever help I can do to ensure that you're there. And then I actually mentioned to her that, this was happening. And she was like, I'm not hearing any of it. And then, of course, I'm extremely indebted to her because she, helped me.
Mentors are very important, right? So whether, it's mentors in India or international mentors, I think that's something this platform, because it's powered by the FDCI, gives you, and Blenders Pride has so many senior designers. It's a very important thing. So I think that's a very important thing for us to sort of end telling them that sort of mentoring is also something that is really important and something that I think has helped all our careers over
Absolutely. I think so. That was the key role that she played in my life, that, she sort of mentored me for those 4 years. And that sort of gave me the wings to then fly on. And definitely, I think the showcase brings that, in a very big way to the young participants and applicants. So I'd like to sign off saying, please apply, because this is going to be a game changer for you guys. The amount of mentorship you'll get, the kind of people who will be mentoring you, those are unimaginable things. So definitely, I agree with you, Sujata. Mentorship is one of the biggest takeaways from this competition.
Thank you, Ashish. So I think we have to remember to be consistent when we're young designers. I think we need to remember exposure, mentoring, and to take advantages of platforms like this Blenders Pride Fashion Tour powered by FDCI. Thank you so much for being part of the My Identity, My Pride Masterclass.
Thank you, Sujata.